My friend was just shot. She's laying in the floor in room 48. I'm not sure if she's still alive or not.
She was bleeding out of her eyes and nose.
This was an execution.
Just after 5 a.m. on July 9th, 2018, Beckley Police Department in West Virginia received a distressing 911 call.
We have been kidnapped since yesterday.
Okay, ma'am, what's your name?
Destiny Conkle, my other friend just passed out. Wait, just get the cops here.
It was 2 rooms. It was like a couch and a table in the first room and an open door on the left. We went back in, there was 2 beds in the second room. We walked back to the bathroom and the victim was laying in the floor. I've seen this too many times before, but I could tell she was dead, you know. There was a substantial amount of blood. So I slung my rifle up and went back outside. We set up a perimeter and called detectives.
It had some symbols of what you would consider maybe a party environment. There were some alcohol containers in an area. There were some food containers nearby. But there were some things that really stood out to us too. There was some damage to the room. There was some lamps that had been broken. A doorknob had been broken off the adjoining door, and pieces of that had been set into an area in the other room.
I remember seeing a chair that was overturned.
It was near that entry door that we came in. I noticed that when we entered the second room, the beds were most disheveled. All the blankets were kind of balled up and like someone had been on that bed for a period of time. And then in the very back of that room is where we actually discovered the victim.
The victim was lying on the ground by the restroom with a gunshot wound.
It'd probably been an hour since the homicide, maybe a little more, since I got called, so everything was secured. They were basically waiting for the crime scene team to get there. When I did roll up, there was 2 females. They were sitting out there still actually upset, crying from the incident. And there was actually a bloody sweater was sitting there next to him, and that was actually the first item that we marked to be collected. We saw there was garbage cans, what's in the garbage cans, cigarettes laying, if there was any drug paraphernalia, any type of ammunition, any type of firearm stuff we were looking for. And then we moved into the other room, and then we observed the female.
Investigators learned that the victim was 19-year-old Amber Meadows.
They both had told us that they had, prior to them going to the hotel, that they had been at a gas station. So obviously we go to the gas station to review video. She gets out of the vehicle and walks into the store.
Amber Meadows goes in the women's restroom.
A few minutes later, a red Jeep pulls into a parking space beside her vehicle, and the 4 males exited the vehicle and approached her vehicle.
And then I just see 2 guys come up at our door. And I guess they were with Laquan. And I've been telling her for days, like, not to mess with him, because I know his path, I know his history, I know all about him. I grew up around him. He's not a good person.
This gentleman that at that time they referred to as Laquan Hudson, he goes into the store, walks right to the women's restroom and just slings the door open and goes in the women's restroom with her. They were in there less than a minute, and then they come out together, and he kind of escorts her to the door itself. And then there's probably a half-hour of interaction between the groups. You know, we'll get a room at the hotel, and you guys can spend the night there, take a shower, and so forth, that kind of thing.
And they were following us behind. They made us go to the travel lot.
Laquan goes into the lobby to reserve the room, used a fake ID. Once that door closed, it was like a switch flipped. The mood changed from, hey, let's hang out, to no one leaves here until we say you can leave.
As we go through our evidence, we start at number 1, which was the shirt we found at the one stop with the girls that was sitting there, which I believe had some suspected blood on it. Once we got to the garbage bags, we go through it. We found wrappers. We eventually get to a receipt from Walmart. We call Detective Bragg with the information of the time.
They determined that receipt was for ammunition that had been purchased at a local Walmart. We were able to see them arrive in a Subaru vehicle. You could clearly tell that it was the same suspects from the video from the convenience store wearing the same clothing. This was several hours earlier in the day. It was on the 8th. They had actually made the ammunition purchase. And then later that night is when they interact with Amber and her friends in the parking lot of that gas station. We had been provided the name Laquan. We weren't familiar with Laquan by that name. Once we were able to watch that Walmart video and confer with other officers, and they immediately identified him and knew him as David Hudson.
The men took all the cell phones from the girls. One of the men moved a chair in front of the door and occupied that chair for the majority of the time that everyone was in this room.
Laquan pulled out a firearm. There was a lot of yelling, and he was demanding that she had owed him something, some money.
They were arguing about drugs. Apparently, he felt like she stole drugs from him or something. But apparently, it was her boyfriend that she was with, and they had problems with each other. So they do like her.
Aurelia and Destiny are separated from Amber.
He made her sleep in the bathtub. And all of a sudden, like, I had to use the bathroom, so they made us go into the other room where the other bathroom was. And Mommy and Destiny was in there because she didn't want to leave me alone.
Destiny and Aurelia walk into the living room and they see the four men hastily gathering up belongings and fleeing the room.
I ran in the other room. Laquan was just grabbing stuff and screaming. She shot herself. He grabbed everything. He's like, you talk, you're good. So I grabbed Aurelia and took off her head.
They said that there was a white male who had been involved, that he was the owner of the red Jeep, and that he went by the nickname KB. We had shown the image of KB to officers throughout the county. One of them had recognized him as Caleb Bird and knew that Caleb Bird had been recently driving a red Jeep SUV. The next day, an officer had actually located the Jeep. And we traveled to that location. Sure enough, it matched the Jeep that we had seen on that video. We also were able to determine that he had a residence, this apartment complex where the Jeep had been found. We went to that apartment. We forced entry into the apartment. His father was inside. We recovered some firearms from the residence that were of particular interest because one of the things that the victims had told us was that a firearm with a green laser had been used to taunt them throughout the night. And we recovered 2 guns from that residence that had green lasers.
They paid me some gas money to give them a ride. I guess they had to go pick up some drugs or whatever they had to do.
He provided the name Tyreek Pearl and also told us that Tyreek lived in the apartment complex where Caleb lived, which is something that we did not know prior to that interview.
Those two gave full, in my view, honest detail about what happened that led up to the death of Amber Meadows.
All 3 of the girls agreed to go to a hotel.
Okay.
We did not force them to do anything they did not want to do.
He felt threatened as well, and he said that that was why he didn't remove himself in that situation, is because he felt like David meant nobody was leaving, including the friends that he had brought.
He explains to me, as well as the other 2 guys in the room, that we're not allowed to leave until he says so.
What about the girls?
No, they were definitely not allowed to leave, period.
I was in there saying the girls were sausages.
Okay.
But I thought he was playing. I promise you.
Mr. Pearl took Mr. Hudson's gun from him and put it in the bathroom. Amber Meadows went into the bathroom, used the bathroom, found the gun in the bathroom.
He started freaking out because he couldn't find his gun. Amber tells me that it was left in the bathroom.
He immediately takes the gun from her and he says, "You're stupid. You could have killed me with this." She said, I would not kill you.
I looked at him and I said, "Oh, it's empty," because he said, "Oh, you could have got me the whole time." I said, "It's empty." And they said, "No, it ain't. No, it ain't. No, it ain't." Bow.
He walked up to me and was like, "We gotta kill the rest of them." And I said no. And I ran off and we left them.
Okay.
We received a call from a local attorney, and the local attorney told us that he had David with him and that he would be willing to turn himself in, but he was not going to provide any sort of statement.
3 years later, in December 2021, David Hudson's trial begins.
Mr. Pearl and Mr. Bird, they were culpable. They certainly led to the overall intimidation of these women. However, they didn't pull the trigger. They didn't take the girl's life. A fair resolution for them was to plead to the conspiracy to kill Amber Meadows, not the actual killing.
Antonio Williams was ultimately convicted of kidnapping and voluntary manslaughter.
He pled guilty and he went to prison for 20 years.
David Hudson was convicted of 3 counts of kidnapping, the homicide of Amber Meadows, and then using a firearm in the commission of a felony. So it ended up that he was convicted on all counts, and then he received 4 life sentences to run consecutive, so he'll never be out.